Hi, welcome to my channel. I'm Deborah Grant and I'm an optometrist with a special interest in binocular vision dysfunction and neurodevelopmental visual issues, all of which is a fancy way of saying that I'm fascinated by how our eyes work together, or don't. The subspecialty of optometry that I'm involved with is often referred to as behavioural optometry. It's a bit of an odd name, and to be honest, I kind of shied away from using the term behavioural optometrist for a number of years. Given that many of the children I see in practice struggle in the classroom and often have diagnoses of ADHD or autism, as well as dyslexia, the term behavioural seemed to carry a lot of unnecessary negative baggage, as if somehow these children's behaviour in the classroom needed fixing, and I was the person who was going to do it. One person even asked if I was like a dog trainer but for kids, so I tiptoed around the phrase. I called myself a binocular vision specialist or a neurodevelopmental optometrist, anything that avoided the term behavioural. But the word behavioural was chosen originally quite deliberately, around 100 years ago, and refers partly to the fact that vision is a learned behavioural skill, and partly to the fact that problems with vision cause us to modify our behaviour in an attempt to adapt. For example, if your eyes don't work together correctly, let's say they're teaming inefficiently, you will probably find reading really tiring, and the behaviour you might display as a direct result of this might be to avoid reading or homework. The behaviour in and of itself is neither good nor bad, but it is understandable when we learn that for this person whose eyes are not teaming, so not working together well, for them, words appear to start moving on a page after a few minutes. I know that if words jiggled around and kept shifting on a page as I was trying to read, I would almost certainly try to avoid it too. The behaviour of the person in this case is telling us something about their vision. Another example might be the child who struggles to track moving objects like a ball. They will be the child who might do anything they can to avoid PE lessons when ball games are timetabled. I mean, no one likes being chosen last for teams, right? Their behaviour, which might involve hanging back or distracting others, begins to make more sense once we understand their vision problems. So I've come full circle, and I now embrace the term behavioural optometrist because, in my opinion, it's the term that best describes what I do. And what is it that I do? Well, as a behavioural optometrist, I investigate how the brain, eyes, and body work together to interpret visual information rather than just measuring how far down an eye test chart someone can read. I investigate how someone's visual habits might be affecting their performance in a classroom or on a sports field. And then, if necessary, I implement a staged program of vision therapy exercises and sometimes spectacles to help improve that person's functional vision. What are the key aspects of behavioural optometry then? Well, in my clinic, I absolutely measure how far down a chart someone can see and whether they need corrective lenses for short-sightedness, which we call myopia, long-sightedness, which we call hyperopia, or astigmatism. I also look carefully at the health of the eyes to check for any underlying disease or structural anomalies. But in addition, I look at how effectively the eyes work together, eye teaming, how they focus, a process called accommodation, and how they track, how good is their oculomotor control. I don't just assess whether they have a particular skill, but also whether they can sustain that skill over time. A child might demonstrate an ability to read small writing on a page, or the smallest line on my sight test chart, for example, but I want to know, can they sustain that for 30 minutes or longer in a classroom? Can they easily shift their gaze from the whiteboard at the front of the class to the writing in their textbook on the desk in front of them? And can they remember any of what they've just read? I also look at visual processing and examine how the brain processes and understands visual information, and I feed this back to parents and the SEND services at school. The work of a behavioural optometrist boils down to the difference between assessing sight and assessing vision. Assessing sight is all about whether the eyes can see, while assessing vision is all about understanding how the brain makes sense of and uses that visual information, sort of functionally in a day-to-day tasks. So what can a behavioural optometrist help with? Children with specific learning difficulties such as dyslexia and neurodivergent children with autism and ADHD quite often have coexisting functional vision difficulties, and this can be something of a double whammy for them. For example, not only do dyslexics have difficulty decoding language, but often their visual problems compound this and make reading and learning even more difficult for them. Autistic children and adults are often overwhelmed by the sheer quantity of visual information in any environment. Facial expressions, information on the whiteboard, bright colours, other children moving around, and that's in addition to all the other sensory assaults of a school environment, scratchy uniforms, strange smells, incomprehensible social rules, etc. Children with ADHD may already struggle to direct their attention in exactly the way a teacher expects, and that becomes even more difficult for them if what they're supposed to be looking at is constantly shifting, moving, and blurring because they're struggling to team their eyes efficiently. In addition, behavioural optometry can help certain children with developmental delays and some patients with acquired brain injuries. So, what can behavioural optometrists not do? Well, we can't cure dyslexia, despite some dubious claims in the far corners of the internet, and neither can we cure ADHD, and nor can we stop someone being autistic. But our skill set does allow us to help people with these diagnoses optimize their vision so that any functional vision difficulties no longer add to their problems. A well-functioning visual system means one less barrier to these children accessing education, and that's super important. So I created this channel to be a resource for how vision works, how it impacts on a child's learning and development, and how it can go wrong, and if it does, what we can do to help put it right. The channel will also hopefully provide useful information for those adults who have often struggled silently for years, feeling that they're battling their own visual systems every day, every time they use a computer, play sport, drive, or even just walk through crowded spaces like a supermarket. I hope you will all find this channel useful. Bye for now.